Now, this is part one of a two-part shiur. We're going to explore what I call the forbidden zones as far as Noahides are concerned. Forbidden zones of Torah study and Shabbat observance, about which I think there's a lot of confusion. These things are forbidden because Noahides have certain restrictions in these areas, and so they constitute the spiritual border between the B'nai Yisrael and the B'nai Noach. And we need to know how to proceed. We need to clear up the confusion. So this is part one. We're going to speak about Torah study today. I'm going to tell you something that you know already, which is that there is one God, one Torah, and one human race. Within the human race are two communities, the B'nai Noach and the B'nai Yisrael. There's one Torah for all of them. But there are two tracks within the Torah in terms of the obligation that each community has towards Hashem. Religion, the Latin root of that word, means obligation. So when we speak about having a religion, we're speaking about our obligations to Hashem. And with regard to these two communities, we generally speak of them in terms like Gentiles and Jews. But I think that these terms tend to emphasize the cultural or ethnic differences between the two communities. And you should know, and I hope this becomes clear as we learn together, that the Torah really does not regard genetics as anything. Cultural and ethnic differences are much less important. They are what gives flavor to life. Different regions, different cultures, different types of people. It makes for a very beautiful and diverse world. But when we look at things through an ethnic or cultural lens, we tend to lose sight of the fact that there is one humanity. History and the national experience of the Jewish people, which has tended to be very difficult at times, tremendous amount of accomplishment and tremendous amount of suffering. And this history has made Jews and Gentiles alien to each other. From the Torah's perspective, though, all of humanity could be united by values through the observance of Torah. If you look at the first source, the verse states, "And you shall guard my statutes and my laws, through the performance of which man shall live. I am Hashem." It does not say that Jews will live by these laws. It says man. And we see in the Gemara, which we'll look at more in depth soon, that at least according to the Tani, Rabbi Meir, remember that a Tani is a teacher in the Mishnah. That verse is speaking of the universal applicability of Torah to all mankind. And I think most people, whether you're Jewish or Gentile, are completely unaware of this. I never hear a conversation about this in my community, and I don't know if you've heard this idea before. But the verse states it clearly, and our sages in the Mishnah affirm it. In some places, Hashem is called Kel Mistater, which means the God that hides. The question is, where does he hide himself? He hides himself behind the created universe. And in the same way, this unity of the human race is hidden by the storm and struggle of history. But Hashem has given us the Torah to bring us together. And I believe that although love is a powerful unifying force, and it's something that we need to increase, what unites people are the values that are above them, especially the ones that are God-given. And the Torah is the only thing that can do this. Think about a couple. I have clients that I see. I'm a psychotherapist by profession. And I do couple sessions. And the difference between treating an individual and treating a couple is that when you're treating an individual, obviously your client is the individual sitting in front of you. But when you treat a couple, your client is their marriage. Your client is the shared values that govern their relationship. When you put that in perspective, these two people can be encouraged to stop fighting with each other because there are higher values that they are both facing, that they're both pointed towards. And that's what it means to have a Torah in the world, that we have Hashem looking over all of us. And like I said, the Torah is the only thing that can bring that kind of unity. And I believe, and let this be the opening statement, I believe that here in the Dutch Noahide community, that's what we are practicing. We are seeing the future from here, from this moment. Now, you all have your source sheets, either in English or in Dutch, so I'm going to rely on you to look at them as I'm going through the lecture. I will point you towards each source at a time, but I'm going to be doing something a little bit differently than I did in the first shiur that we did on abortion. I'm going to be speaking a little more conversationally about the sources. So just do me a favor and follow as best that you can. And this way, I think this will flow a little bit better. Source number 4. In the Shulchan Aruch, there is a law that states one must be very careful with Birkat HaTorah. Birkat HaTorah is the blessing of the Torah. The sages, okay, I say the sages, but I want to start introducing a little bit of terminology that is common to all Torah learning communities. Another way to say sages, which will make it a lot easier, is to refer to them by the acronym Chazal, which stands for Chachamenu Zichronam Livracha, our sages of blessed memory, because these are the purveyors of Torah, I think that you can safely refer to them as your sages as well. So Chazal have created a format of blessings to be recited before the performance of commandments. The specific blessing that is known as Birkat HaTorah goes as follows. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And in English, blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engage in the words of Torah. The truth is, I'm only citing one version of that blessing, of that bracha. There's actually a dispute amongst the Rishonim as to which version of this blessing to make. There's another opinion that leaves out the word la'asok, which means to engage, and then it reads Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah, which means that Hashem has commanded us regarding the words of Torah, omitting the idea of engaging in it. And the implication, according to the second version, is that the blessing allows a person to begin speaking words of Torah. That's something that we have to recite in the morning. Now, this is beyond the scope of what we're going to be learning tonight. So I'm going to return to the first version because it makes a better introduction to our topic, and it happens to parallel the actual language in the Gemara. So la'asok b'divrei Torah, we have to understand what this means. What does it mean to engage in the words of Torah? The Taz, who is one of the commentators on Shulchan Aruch, comments regarding Birkat HaTorah. That was the first source, not the second source. He says that it means to learn Torah with tremendous toil and effort. And he gives two examples of how a person does that. One of these is called pilpul, which is not so much of a method of learning as a description of the attempt to sharpen one's understanding until one grasps the most infinitesimal aspects of the material. The word is pilpul. Does anybody speak or read Hebrew here? Do you know what word the word pilpul is similar to? Does it remind you of anything else that you put in your salad, especially if you're a Northern European type and spice doesn't really go well with you? But if you're a little bit more Mediterranean, you put in the hot peppers, the stuff that just, it hurts so good. So pilpel and pilpul come from the exact same root. So you can imagine that learning with pilpul makes your learning sharp. Okay, it's very similar to how I would describe my own Rebbe's method. My Rebbe was Reb Gershon Yankelevich, Zichrono Livracha, and he would just take a page of Gemara and, like a diamond-tipped, slow-moving drill, would just crush it until we had the entire thing absolutely clear. But it's not really a learning method. I mean, it's really more of a description of a process by which you come to a sharper understanding. Okay? The other method, or the other way of learning that the Taz mentions, is called Maseh Matan, which means give and take. That phrase, Maseh Matan, the classic use of that phrase concerns business transactions, because that's what a business transaction is. But here, the Taz is referring to the style of dialogue that takes place between chavrusas. Okay, chavrusas are study partners who trade their ideas about the text being studied back and forth until between them it becomes clear to them. It's a very beautiful way of learning, because you are both with putting your minds together and trying to approach the truth. You're able to come up with it between the two of you. We don't need to force our ideas on somebody. We can think in common and think in parallel. Now, with this commentary of the Taz, we have a definition of the Hebrew verb la'asok, to be busy with Torah. Pilpul and ma'aseh matan. According to the Taz, the mitzvah to learn and study Torah is only fulfilled when it's learned this way. This is what it means to la'asok b'divrei Torah. Up until now, we have been touching upon the Jewish religious obligation to study Torah. But let's say that in the following idea. In the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, we'll find the following guideline. For some reason, I have the number of the source is missing for me, but it is Avot chapter 1, Mishnah 17, and it should be on your sheets. So we find the following guideline from, here it is. Lo hamidrash ikar ela hamaseh. Study is not the main point. It's not the most important thing. Action is the most important thing. And what this means is that ultimately the study of Torah is meant to facilitate living by its laws and principles and performing its commandments. So according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the study of Torah, as critical as it is, as much of a mitzvah as it is still secondary to its being lived, actually being applied. But at least we should have a model of what Torah study should look like. It's really hard work. We know that Jews have 613 mitzvot, and that in order to perform them properly, they have to learn what the Torah says about them. We can then assume that B'nai Noach, who have 7 mitzvot, or to phrase it better, 7 categories of mitzvot, should also learn Torah to know what they should do. But let's look at the following passage from the Gemara. And this should be source number 6. Rabbi Yochanan said, a non-Jew, the phrase in the Gemara is actually Ovid Kochavim, which means a star worshiper, basically an idolater. Now, why does the Gemara use the phrase Ovid Kochavim with regard to non-Jews? Sometimes it means non-Jews, and sometimes it actually means idolater. But throughout history, Christian censors have gone through the Gemara and have taken out the word goy, and demanded essentially that it be replaced with the phrase Ovid Kochavim. So in some places that's what it literally means, and some places it does not. And it gets a bit confusing. But the fact is that the qualification of Ovid Kochavim, of idolater, makes a very big difference in terms of what we're talking about. Especially given the fact that the vast majority of non-Jews today are not idolaters. So, Rabbi Yochanan said, a non-Jew who busies himself with the study of Torah, meaning osek b'divrei Torah, is liable to the death penalty. Pretty harsh. As the verse states in Deuteronomy, the Torah that Moses commanded us is an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. It's an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. It's an inheritance for us, not for them. Sounds like the Torah is the exclusive property of B'nai Yisrael. And that's a pretty severe punishment for Torah learning, according to this opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the Gemara raises an objection. If so, that the study of Torah carries the death penalty, let this prohibition be counted amongst the 7 mitzvot. This is a major challenge to Rabbi Yochanan's ruling. Because our basic understanding is that there are 7 mitzvot for B'nai Noach, 6 prohibitions, and 1 positive mitzvah of establishing courts in order to enforce the other 6. Nowhere in that list do we find a negative commandment forbidding Gentiles to learn Torah. So we're in trouble here. The only option Rabbi Yochanan, or the Amora who's speaking on his behalf, has is to demonstrate that it's in the framework of the Sheva Mitzvot that the study of Torah is prohibited. Now, there are 2 attempts that are made. Remember, the Rabbi Yochanan's proof text refers to the Torah as morashah, an inheritance of the Jewish people. Here comes resolution number 1. The Amora who reads the word morashah, inheritance, in the plain sense, categorizes the act of Gentiles learning Torah as a form of theft. An inheritance is the property of its inheritors, in this case, the Jewish people. But what seems to be happening here, okay, if we say that this is a form of theft, then it fits neatly into the Sheva Mitzvot, because theft is one of them. What kind of theft is this? That's another question. I'm going to quote something from the Ask Vanessa column in the New York Times from 6 days ago. Quote, the question of cultural appropriation is a highly complicated, fraught issue with no simple answers. You may remember that a few years ago, a white high school senior wore a cheongsam to her prom, and it set off a firestorm of criticism in the United States, though in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, many social media users saw it as a cultural victory. Skipping ahead, there is a difference between wearing a garment as a homage and a sign of cultural appreciation and wearing it as a costume or because you think it looks cute. This can be especially tricky when it comes to fashion, which has long loved to dabble in what used to be termed the exotic, often without any regard for point of origin or meaning. See, for example, Gucci's use of turbans that evoked Sikh dress as a runway accessory in 2019, not to mention the continued widespread use of the generic and derogatory term Oriental in reference to style and prints. Obviously, this is not classic theft, where person A takes something away from person B, and then person B doesn't have it anymore. The Jewish people will not lose the Torah if a non-Jew studies it. But maybe what is being suggested is that Gentiles learning Torah is a form of theft called cultural appropriation. The United States is completely infected with it. So the idea of cultural appropriation, if you're not a Rastafarian, you shouldn't be wearing dreadlocks. Maybe if you're not Jewish, you shouldn't be eating half sour pickles, and shouldn't be learning Torah. But if we can establish that this is theft, then it's prohibited under the Sheva Mitzvot. Okay, that was resolution number 1. Resolution number 2. There's an Amora who reads the word morasha as me'orasa. Me'orasa means a betrothed woman, a betrothed maiden. And what he does is he compares the learning of Torah by Gentiles, put your seatbelts on, to a person who rapes a woman who has been betrothed to someone else. And that's something that's punishable by stoning. Look in source number 7. The Maharsha explains that according to the second opinion, just as non-Jewish Torah study is not actually theft, the idea of the Torah being an inheritance is also just an analogy. In other words, to come onto this second idea, you have to not take the idea of Torah as an inheritance literally. And we see in the Mishnah that the Torah cannot be acquired through inheritance. Look at source number 8. Rabbi Yossi says that you should prepare yourself to learn Torah because you will not acquire it through inheritance. What does it mean? Commentators explain that just because your father or grandfather learned Torah, that doesn't make it your accomplishment. You have to do the work yourself. It's not an inheritance. In fact, it's really in the public domain for anybody to take. And just think today, no one's going to stop you. You want to go on Sefaria.org, you want to go on Wikitext, you want to purchase the Bar Ilan Responsa CD, you'll have access to absolutely everything. No one's going to stop you. So the word morasha must mean something else. It means a betrothed woman, according to the second idea. And the Maharsha continues to explain that when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, it was like the fiancé of the Jewish people. When you encounter the Torah, at first, it's like your fiancé. And when you learn it, it becomes your wife. And there are many, many times many analogies between, like, descriptions of the Torah as a woman throughout our texts. So the upshot here is that if a Gentile engages in the study of Torah, it is as if he has slept with the fiancée of the B'nai Israel. Now we're getting closer to the Sheva Mitzvot, aren't we? Now it's a transgression of the prohibition against adultery, which is one of the Noahide laws. So, looks like we've saved Rabbi Yochanan. But wait. And look what comes next. Let's get back to the Gemara, back to source number 6. Objection number 2. Rabbi Meir would say, from where do we know that someone who's a Gentile and engages in Torah study is like the high priest? Now remember the verse in Leviticus 18 verse 5, which is source number 1. Again, and you shall guard my statutes and my laws through the performance of which man shall live. I am Hashem. Rabbi Meir says there is no mention of priests, no mention of Levites, no mention of Israelites, which are the three subdivisions of the Jewish people. Just ha'adam, a person. From here you learn, says Rabbi Meir, that a Gentile who engages in Torah study is like the high priest. This is the polar opposite of the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, again, the key aspect of this verse is the word ha'adam, a human being. The verse does not specify what type of human being. We would have assumed, and I think people do, that this applies to Jewish human beings. But according to Rabbi Meir, who certainly has enough authority, it applies to every human being. All human beings can live a redeeming life through the mitzvot of the Torah. But we can ask, and we should ask, why the need for comparison between a Gentile engaged in deep Torah study and the Kohen Gadol, the high priest? Why did Rabbi Meir specifically choose that analogy? Why didn't he say a righteous person, a holy person? Why does learning Torah make him like the high priest? For this, we have the Maharal of Prague. I don't have it in the sources because it was a bit too complicated to transcribe. But he notes that when the Israelites accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai, a very unusual spiritual transformation happened. Way back in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, we meet not only the first man and woman, but the first toxic friend. The world's first bad friend. You ever have a bad friend that just got right into your guts and encouraged you to make all sorts of horrible decisions? Well, here he is, the first toxic friend, the serpent. God may have cursed the serpent and cast him down on his belly to just be a lowly snake, but we find out that his influence would be felt until the moment that B'nai Israel stood at Mount Sinai and accepted the Torah. When they did that, the spiritual impurity that the Nachash, that the serpent managed to inject into humanity, vanished. It was gone. Unfortunately, when the B'nai Israel committed the sin of worshiping the golden calf, it came back. They returned to the state of spiritual impurity that the world had been in since the time of the sin of the tree of knowledge, the Eitz Hadas, and this continues to this day. But, says the Maharal, even in this state of spiritual impurity, they still have the mitzvah to learn Torah. It should contradict. You should need to be, I mean, maybe intuitively or at first pass, you should need to be completely spiritually pure to learn Torah. You should need to have qualifications. But we understand now that Rabbi Meir chose the analogy of the Kohen Gadol because he was the most physically and spiritually pure personality within the Jewish people. He was required to be in order to perform his functions in the Holy Temple. Very high stakes over there. But whether you are spiritually pure like the high priest or completely defiled by the serpent's influence, the Torah is open to you. And Rabbi Meir is telling us that it doesn't matter if you're not Jewish. A non-Jew reaches the highest level through the in-depth study of Torah. But we're left with two opinions in the Gemara that are totally opposed to each other. So this is a cliffhanger. Where is this going to go? Death penalty or high priest? Polar opposites. What do we do? So the next statement of the Gemara resolves the conflict between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Meir. When is a non-Jew learning Torah like the high priest? Hahu b'mitzvot didei. This applies when that person is focusing his learning energy on his mitzvot, on the 7 Noahide laws. Now, let's see how the Rishonim bring these ideas from the Gemara into practice. Look at source number 9. The Rambam says, a non-Jew who engages in Torah study is liable for the death penalty. It's a direct quote from Rabbi Yochanan. And then he says, Lo ya'asok ela b'sheva mitzvot shalahan bilvad. They should only be osek, engaged in their 7 mitzvot. Now this combines the opinion of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yochanan, and it includes the resolution between the two of them. He also goes on to say that a non-Jew who learns Torah is not actually executed for it. You said death penalty, where's the execution? Right? Doesn't go exactly like Rabbi Yochanan says. Why? Well, first of all, the expression death penalty, really, not to take away from the legitimacy of statements made in the Gemara, but it is purely theoretical. Because rabbinical courts in our day have no authority to give either corporal or lethal punishment. That can only happen when there is a Beit HaMikdash, a temple, and a Sanhedrin. But if you look at source number 10, the Lechem Mishnah explains, here's a commentary on the Rambam. He explains the Rambam's reasoning. Now, if you need to stretch, I understand. We're about to recall something from the Shiur on abortion, and I need all your brain cells to be online now. If you remember from the Shiur on abortion, the fact that the law is stricter for B'nai Noach than it is for the B'nai Yisrael with regard to abortion was a major problem in the Gemara. It was a big question. And the objection that was raised over there was, Leit midam de l'Yisrael mutar l'akum asur. There cannot be a case where Jews are permitted to do something and B'nai Noach are forbidden. Why? Because Jewish law, which is comprised of 613 mitzvot, is stricter. Tosfot said over there, if you remember, yes, there can be a case like that. Where can there be a case like that? When something is a mitzvah for a Jew, like Sabbath observance, like Torah study, in both cases, Jews can, and B'nai Noach can't. But we'll have to understand this properly. So that's how we went. That's what we went with during the Shiur on abortion. But this is what we call a machloket rishonim, a dispute amongst the rishonim. The Rambam says just the opposite. If it is a mitzvah for a Jew, there is no reason why a non-Jew would be prohibited. And even if they were for some reason, they certainly couldn't be penalized with death for it. Okay? Just the opposite. Now, going back, before we go back, I want to ask if anybody has any thoughts at this point. If we can edit questions out from the end, we can edit them out from the middle as well. Any questions, clarifications? We just went through Parshat Mishpatim, and over there it says that one of the things that was given were all the Mishpatim, Kol HaMishpatim. Rashi says over there, Sheva mitzvot shenitztavu b'nei Noach, meaning that's where we get the Sheva mitzvot from. Ever since Mount Sinai, Sheva mitzvot are delivered to you through the Torah. So how on earth are you going to get Sheva mitzvot if you don't learn? So yeah, excellent. Excellent observation. Anyone else? I've given a lot of material here, and I've taken us through a forest. So, anything so far? Go ahead.
I was hanging on the word pilpul.
Mm-hmm.
So we can study the seven mitzvot in depth, but we shouldn't study Torah because just of the study. It has to be that you can use it. You should not
You read the
study
back
it
of the
to
book.
make something new.
You read the back of the book. We are going in that direction.
Okay.
We are going that direction, but it needs to be explained. I have a feeling I've seen a lot of stuff out there, and I think this needs to be explained better. And you had there's a lot of big ideas out there, and there are a lot of catchphrases that we've learned. One of the things that I was taught in yeshiva was that you can't make a statement unless you have some source to back it up. I'm just saying that, like, we hear that kind of stuff, and we need to be shown sources. We need to see what that's actually based on, right? Because what is it about a Jew? I'm not saying no, by the way. The fact is that is the role that has been laid out for the Jewish people in the world, is to be the purveyors of Torah to the rest of the world. Does that mean that everybody else is supposed to be entirely dependent, or can they achieve levels of dependence where they themselves can connect to the Chokhmat Hashem once they've become somewhat adept and somewhat knowledgeable about what the sources say? I happen to believe that. And what I see, what I'd like to give here is a sense of source-based Torah. You know, it's a rigorous approach, but I think we're going to be the better for it. So let's see how this goes. Let's go back to the idea of Birkat HaTorah, which we started with. Jews are required to recite Birkat HaTorah before engaging in any Torah study. It's part of the daily cycle of blessings that are made each morning. And again, the blessing is Borach Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God and King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engage in the words of the Torah. We have to zoom in on the phrase V'tzivanu, which means who has commanded us. That phrase is not recited by somebody who has not been commanded to do so. For example, this doesn't just apply to non-Jews. Okay, Jews who have the status of Kohanim, they're a Kohen, if they are of the priestly class, they recite a blessing before performing the act of what is called Birkat Kohanim, whereby they stand before the congregation and bless the people who are there at a certain point in the prayer. Jews who are not Kohanim cannot say this blessing because they have not been commanded to perform Birkat Kohanim. I can't make that blessing. I'm not a Kohen. And this is the basic rule when reciting a blessing, which involves using the name of God, which is high stakes. If it doesn't apply to you, you're taking God's name in vain by reciting the blessing. The specific blessing of Birkat Torah is about Torah study. But there are really two types of Torah study. And Angelique has already alluded to this. Just like you have theoretical science and applied science. Theoretical science involves the formulation of new theories and the updating of existing theories, whereas applied science seeks to apply theoretical knowledge practically in everyday life. Remember the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel: study is not the most important thing, action is. He is emphasizing the application of Torah. the actual performance of mitzvot over the theory. That doesn't mean that study is not important, that theory is not important. In fact, Chazal say, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah outweighs everything. But it is there to serve as what we call a hechsher mitzvah, preparation for serving Hashem practically with action. Now, who's required to recite Birkat HaTorah? Only people who are actually commanded to involve themselves in both the theory and application of the entire Torah. Who's that? That's the Jewish people. I have to explain here that there's a unique aspect of Jewish life in that immersing yourself in theoretical learning has a spiritual value in and of itself, is part of what has been commanded of the Jewish people. But that is the aspect that is unique to them. What we see from the Rambam is that a Ben Noach's relationship to Torah study has parameters. He can be osek in Torah, both theory and application, with toil and effort, with pilpul, maaseh umatan, specifically as a way to enable him to fulfill the Noahide laws. It's not an obligation. The key is action. Actual fulfillment of the 7 laws. If they do that because they listen to a podcast, or if they do that because they learn Torah, both are good. And just to by way of analogy, imagine you're a spy, and your mission is to find a microchip with all the nuclear secrets of an enemy state. Your field agent was able to hide this microchip in a botanical garden before he was captured by double agents. Right now, they're busy interrogating your colleague and waterboarding him, trying to get the information out of him, and you have to get to it before they do. If you stop to admire the roses and the climbing vines and the lily pads, you might not accomplish your mission. That's a Ben Noach. Ben Noach has to stay mission-focused in his or her Torah study because, especially for them, action is the main point. That is also applicable to the Jewish people, right? By the way, serving Hashem, developing love and reverence and awe for Hashem, all of these things go beyond the strict parameters of just the 7 mitzvot. And they're incredibly important, and they're going to involve a lot of deep learning, which I can't wait to do with you. But theoretical study of the entire Torah, like the Jews are commanded, there the rule for B'nai Noach is stay in your lane. It's not a comparison of the intellectual capacity of Jews and non-Jews. This is the spiritual boundary between the B'nai Noach and the B'nai Israel. Torah, and as we will discuss next time, Sabbath observance. But we live in a world of educated and intelligent people. If B'nai Noach want to have a richer, deeper, and more fulfilling religious life, they're going to want to engage in the study of Torah. And there you have it, my friends. I hope that we've clarified. I hope that we've clarified what this is for B'nai Noach. You know, in a certain sense, you know, as somebody who very much desires to see the unification of humanity, you know, for us all to come together, as the prophecies all state, and as we daven for on Rosh Hashanah, that the entire world should be Shem Echad, and that Kol Asher Nisham Ba'apo, anybody that has a neshama will say Hashem Elokei Yisrael Melech U'Malchuso B'Chol Mshalah. He's the king, and his kingship extends over everything. It's something that we will all be able to say together. Sometimes it's difficult to be on either side of this glass wall, but I think that we're going to get through it through very strong bonds of love and brotherhood. And also, I mean, just to reassure you, if you think that, you know, the scope of Sheva Mitzvot is like this just tiny little piece of Torah that you can study, I mean, look at what we did tonight. We have gone through written Torah, oral Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, Rishonim, Poskim, Shulchan Aruch, commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, what we call machshava, which is aspects of Torah philosophy. It's been an absolute smorgasbord of learning, and none of it offends the parameters of the restrictions regarding theoretical Torah study. This is what you need to live a full, rich life as B'nai Noach. And you know what? If it's tantalizing to you, and you find, but I got to see the rest of it. I just have to see the rest of it. I'm not here to proselytize. I'm not going to do that. But you have to know that the door is open. Right? That's something I'm just going to state for the record. But even here, you're going to find, we're going to see next time we get together, we're going to be discussing the concept of Shabbat observance and where a Ben Noach or a Bat Noach is positioned vis-a-vis that. That's also very interesting, and I think it's going to be full of things that you don't know yet. But we're going to find that there is a very, very big world of Torah, of spirituality, of connection with Hashem that we can have right here. And so I guess want to give us all a blessing that we should find our chelik, our portion in Torah, and we should be able to plumb its depths and climb its heights for an incredible connection with the Kadosh Baruch, with the Holy One, blessed be He, and ultimately with each other as well.